listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zinno.
Welcome back to the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Before we get to this week's episode that features a former Army officer and combat veteran who's now an endurance athlete. Get to that coming up in just a few moments. But first, our usual plethora of announcements coming in. Follow us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hazard Ground, at Hazard Ground Podcast. Of course, go to our website, hazardground.com, and take part in our Amazon promotion. Once you go to hazardground.com, you can click on the Amazon button at the bottom of the homepage or under the sponsors tab. It'll redirect you to Amazon. So when you're doing all that back-to-school shopping or starting to get ready for fall clothes, whatever it may be, go to hazardground.com first. It sends you to Amazon. We get a portion of what you guys spend, and then we donate a portion of that back to some of the great charities and organizations you've heard featured here on the show. So it's a great way to help out veterans charities all across America just by doing some Amazon shopping, but got to go to hazardground.com first. As well, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Give us that thumbs up and subscribe. Continue to leave us Apple reviews. These help grow the show. Doesn't have to be a lengthy review. Just give us 5 stars. Tell us why you love the show. I love hearing the feedback from everybody, whether it's on Apple Podcasts or through our social media sites. Keep the feedback coming. We certainly appreciate hearing from you guys always. All right, with that out of the way, let's get to this week's guest, who is a former Army captain who spent 7 years in the military, including 3 combat tours, all of them, ironically, to Iraq, nowhere else. And he has now made a life for himself as an endurance athlete with quite the social media following. He is Jason Wood, joining us here on the Hazard Ground. Jason, welcome, and thanks for being here, brother.
Hey, Mark, thanks for having me. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, it certainly has. And it's good to note that I think that we finally have found somebody as a guest on the podcast who's better looking than I am. So I now have to take a back seat as the best looking person on this show. As my producer is rolling her eyes very hard in the back of her head. Yes. All right. I might be the 3rd best looking person on this podcast. Just ask me, I'll tell you. But anyway, brother, I say that in jest. But no, I only say that because, again, you know, through your time as an endurance athlete, you've had a huge social media following that you've grown. I know you've been featured in a bunch of different places, and we'll get all into the endurance athlete stuff because, you know, usually as guys get into our age group, our endurance wanes. Yours seems to be going in the other direction.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing in that field, like in the 100-mile plus races. A lot of guys that are over 40 years old are actually excelling. And I got a theory behind that. We'll talk about that later.
Okay. Well, listen, I'm all for theories, heartache, neurosis, queries, and theories. Let's start back at the beginning for you, though. How and why did you end up in the military, in the Army?
So I was in high school, graduated in 2000, and I went to my guidance counselor. My parents had me when they were teenagers. It was one of those situations where, they couldn't necessarily afford college tuition and all those kind of different things. And so it was basically on my own. I had a younger brother and sister that they had to raise as well. So I went to my guidance counselor and said, hey, what are the options I have? And he was a big proponent of the ROTC scholarship. So he said, hey, look, it's, the ROTC, you'll sign up, you'll get a 4-year scholarship. You'll just have to do some active duty time once you graduate, and then you'll be an officer. And, right now there's nothing really going on in the world. It was, 99, 2000. So I actually went on a partial football scholarship, partial ROTC scholarship. So football paid for the room and board and everything like that. And then the Army, ROTC paid for tuition and books and that stuff. So was able to get a full ride, which was amazing. Awesome. Went out to a small school in Kentucky called the University of Cumberland. Graduated after 4 years. In May of 2004, I got my commission. And then 6 months later, I was in Iraq for the first time. So it was kind of immediate, bam, bam, life's right in front of you. So, I remember 9/11 happened my sophomore year in college, and I kind of knew at that point, military career, that the guidance counselor had promised me probably wasn't going to be the thing.
That's kind of why I was chuckling as you were explaining it, because I got literally similarly the same spiel, except it was from my parents and my stepdad, who was a Vietnam vet. Hey, you get, he was enlisted too. Hey, you get to go in as an officer. You guys don't have to do anything. There's nothing going on right now. And I joke around all the time. I tell people, like, my senior year when I graduated was 99, and I tell the story of all the time, like all my classmates are going to job fairs. And they're like, you going to job fair? And I'm like, no. And they're like, why? I'm like, I got to go in the Army. And they say, well, why don't you get a real job? Like that's what it was in the pre 9/11 world. It's just kind of, the old go to war, or go to jail kind of deal. Like that was the reason you ran to the military, even as an officer. Like we weren't the quote leadership factory that we are now, that ROTC is known as now, right? Like that's the phrase that they like to throw around there. So I certainly can empathize and sympathize with that whole notion that the world changed drastically after 9/11. When you had gotten into ROTC, did you have any idea about the military? Did you have any background in it?
No, not really. I had a great uncle of mine, my grandmother's brother, who had served in World War II. He was a bomber pilot. Worked, flew the China to Burma hump, and then my grandfather had served in the Virginia National Guard, I think it was Air National Guard, for a little while. So, but it wasn't, really a family thing. And then I grew up in an area. We're one of the largest military areas in the world. I mean, I live in the Virginia Beach area, so we have, naval bases, Army bases, Air Force bases. We have all that around us. But so you were exposed to it, but you weren't really in the lifestyle. I didn't understand all the things, all the facets of a military lifestyle and what they were going to ask of me. It wasn't until my sophomore year, I think it was the summer of my sophomore year, where I was fortunate enough, ROTC gets slots to Army Airborne School. And I was able to get a slot to airborne school that summer. And I remember that was my first, really just hit you in the face military type experience with true training and everything. And being around, guys and gals that had already been deployed and coming back and were off to Ranger School, Marine Raiders, all those kind of guys were in my class that I graduated airborne school with. And so it was that was the experience that I think I really learned a lot about what I was kind of getting myself into. And I took it more seriously from there.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing because I didn't really get that, as crazy as it sounds, I didn't really get that experience until after my first deployment. Like I didn't really, obviously I was commissioned, went on active duty, and I knew about active duty life, but all this was stuff, was a pre 9/11 world, and I had gotten off active duty just a few months prior to 9/11, and went and transitioned to the Guard, and so my Army experience was rather limited, at least what they told you about it, and I was too young and cocky to really embrace what I was doing in the military. I mean. I say it almost proudly, like, do you have regrets about your career? Yeah, I got a ton of regrets. I wish I was a better lieutenant. I wish I paid attention more as a 21-year-old kid. I wish I took ROTC more seriously. I wish I embraced everything that the military had to offer me instead of being a cocky SOB and thinking that, this was just going to be a means to an end for me to pay to college, right? Like, because that's what I went into it for. I didn't have great expectations for it. And now, I mean, obviously 23 years later, I'm still in uniform, and it certainly served me well, but to that end, I think it's great that you had that experience at such a young age that sort of brought the military into, got inside you a little bit more.
Yeah. No, I was very fortunate for that. It prepared me a little bit more because I went in with definitely a more open mindset. And one of the things that, specifically a lot of the enlisted, which constantly tell me is just, listen to your platoon sergeant. Listen to your senior enlisted leadership. Make sure you're listening to them because they're going to guide you in the right direction a lot of times. And I just remember, really after officer basic course, I mean, I was right to my first unit and then on a plane to Iraq, and I was very fortunate that first deployment to have some great senior enlisted leadership around me that provided great mentorship for me. Obviously, I had officers around me that were great mentors as well, but really being able to understand the enlisted lifestyle and what their years and years and years of experience versus my days of experience had to offer was just that did a great deal for me as I move forward with my career.
So you got to Iraq rather quickly. By the way, I meant to ask you, what did you branch? What did you end up branching?
Yeah, so I was debating that, during my college career, and I didn't know if the military was going to be the thing for me moving forward as a career. I was a lot like you in the fact that, it was a means to an end to get a college degree. So, I definitely had a lot of friends that were going the infantry route, Rangers, all that kind of stuff. But then I I was kind of like, what can I really use in the real world moving forward? And so, started looking at logistics type things and ended up branching transportation.
Because it's in your backyard in Virginia Beach, right there, Fort Eustis.
Yeah, Fort Eustis. So.
See, I'm glad we have this synergy. I branched ordnance because I went to college in Baltimore, and I'm like, oh, the home ordnance is 30 minutes away. It's right there in Aberdeen Proving Grounds. I'm like, oh, I get to hang out here. I'll be in the Northeast. I live near my family. Yeah, I didn't know when I picked that branch I was going to have to go to a different base. I thought that's where I was going to stay the whole time. That tells you how little I knew what I was getting into as a lieutenant.
Well, I got fortunate. Like my officer basic course was at Fort Eustis, and then I ended up getting immediately assigned to a unit at Fort Eustis. And I spent basically, out of the 7 years, I think I spent 5 years at Fort Eustis. Technically at Fort Eustis. Most of the time was in Iraq.
Yeah, I was going to say.
My units were based at Fort Eustis, and then from there, I got after my company command time, I got a job as an aide to a major general who was out in Scott Air Force Base in Illinois, and I got the chance to go out there for a little bit, be stationed at Air Force Base, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, listen, I mean, Virginia Beach and Baghdad, similar in the sense that there's a lot of beach, just Baghdad has no ocean, so there's that. Anyway. All right, so you get, like, literally, you said you get to your unit and you get right on a plane and go over in 03, like beginning of 03, right? The invasion, March time, April time, where are we?
It was 04. It was
04, okay.
It was October, November of 04 timeframe.
All right.
So I graduated college in May of 04. October, November, I was on the plane. In fact, before I even graduated my officer basic course, I was loading the Connex with my gear to fly over to Iraq, and then I was going to get meet my unit there.
Are you thinking like, oh crap, I made a bad decision at this point?
It wasn't until we were actually flying into, because I got my first deployment when I was stationed in Mosul at Camp Diamondback.
Okay.
Up there, and at that time it was the tip of what they were calling the Triangle of Death. Yep. And watching the news is like, oh my gosh, what is this? And then we were landing on Diamondback, on Mosul Airfield there. And then I just remember we're getting off the plane. It was one of those little small, like Sherpa planes, the transport planes. We landed, and immediately we started getting mortared. And I was like, oh man, I'm like a 21, 22-year-old kid at that point. Like, oh, this is it. This is where it all happens. And so that was when I was like, man, what did I do? And then that deployment was kind of crazy. I mean, we got mortared pretty often. And then Christmas time of that year, December of 04, the suicide bomber walked into the Merez dining facility there and blew himself up. And at that point was one of the deadliest days in Iraq. And I was unfortunately there to witness that whole thing. So, I mean, that was kind of my welcome to the war and welcome to military life experience.
When that happens, I mean, did you know anybody who was killed there?
I knew one.
Okay.
I knew one. We were there with the 25th Infantry Division.
Mm-hmm. I deployed with those guys too. Weird again. Okay. So a lot of connectivity here.
Yeah. So we were up there and with them. And unfortunately, I had one of the guys that I hung out a lot with at the MWR and, watched movies, play pool. He was unfortunately there in the dining facility when it happened. But I think 20 or 22, it was a good number of military and, contractors that had lost their lives in that.
I mean, I remember seeing pictures of that thing. Anyway, how much does that affect not only you, but like your unit, the base in general after that happened? Like, what's the mood?
Well, I remember just the immediate reaction was just nuts. I mean, you got a lot of people running around because where the airfield was and where the combat hospital cache was on Diamondback and Merez, you had to drive, 5, 10, 15 minutes to get from one point to the next. So they were bringing, injured and the wounded and dead over from the dining facility to the airfield to fly out. And I remember they were dropping bodies next to the cache. People were, doing treatment there immediately. And then there was kind of a quiet time. And then all of a sudden the airfield started getting mortared. It was a very, well thought out and planned attack. And we started getting mortared. And so it was very hectic. And then I remember for, weeks after, it was kind of one of those situations where you're always kind of on high alert, and the base, definitely the morale had gone down. It was one of those situations where everybody was spending a lot of time at memorial services and things like that for everybody. And so it was a rough couple months. And then I'd say about a couple months. And then I left Diamondback early in 2005 to go stand up a airfield and a Convoy staging yard at Kayara West. It was Q West is what the short name was. Yep. It was just south of Mosul, or I think it was north maybe. I can't remember exactly, but it was. We got a lot of the convoys coming down from Harbor Gate and the Turkey border there, and that would distribute things all the way around Iraq. And then a C-130 had crashed on the airfield a couple nights before we had actually gone down there. So our job was to go down there and set up the airfield and start establishing kind of staging areas to move equipment from that base. So we didn't see a lot of action there. So that was fortunate. But the time I saw in Diamondback and Mosul was definitely a lot.
Did you think you were going to die after that bombing in the Chow Hall? Look, if they can do this inside of our post at the one place where nothing bad is supposed to happen other than, your steak is not supposed to taste like steak, what else could go wrong?
Yeah, and it was a time then I remember we were still early on. So, you didn't even have to show an ID card to get in the dining facility. You didn't have to do a lot of the security measures to get in and do things that you did later on and during the war. But I remember afterwards seeing they had posted a YouTube video of the guys that were sitting out on the main supply route that was outside the base filming the explosion happening. So you didn't see what happened inside the tent, but you saw the aftermath of the guy blowing himself up in the tent, the hole blowing through the tent and everything. And then, just constantly getting mortared and everything. So you start having to face that reality that, death is a possibility. And so that you eventually get to that point where you're like, okay, well, if it's my day, it's going to be my day.
Yeah.
Did
you ever get mad or angry?
Yeah, I think what really when I really got mad or angry is when I saw the YouTube video and I saw how they were using that as propaganda and having a friend that had passed away in that attack and all the loss of life and craziness that had occurred from that and just seeing how they were using that. I think that's when I really got pissed off about the whole situation and then it was a rough time.
When do you leave that deployment?
I left that deployment a year later, so it would have been October, November timeframe of 2005, okay. And then came back and then got my first job as a platoon leader for a transportation company, 89th Transportation Company out of Fort Eustis, and literally I land getting stuff off the plane basically, and I meet my new company commander. And he's like, hey, we're deploying in 8 months. So yeah, I deployed right around August timeframe the next year, 05, 06, and it was another year-long deployment. And during that deployment, it was interesting. We were a transportation unit. A lot of guys and gals trained to drive 915s, which are tractor trailers. But we were being repurposed as a convoy escort company. So we were going to go over there and be basically a gun truck company where we were going to escort convoys, the logistics convoys, wherever they needed to go in Iraq. So, you're going from everybody just having to have basic qualifications on an M4 and being able to drive a 915 to now you got to be able to mount a 50 cal, work a 249, do all the different things that normally a transportation unit's not really tasked to do. So that was a crazy 8 months of just, train up, trying to get people qualifications on weapon systems and things that they had never seen in their lives before, and then get over there and do the mission.
Kind of crazy. In all this time here, are you sort of waiting to do your actual job as a transportation PL and start running convoys? Is there a part of you that's like, hey, when am I actually going to do what I got trained to do?
Yeah, I actually, so my company command time, we did convoys, and that was a fun time for me. I loved my company command time, but it's one of those balance things for me where like the best time I had in the military was probably as a platoon leader doing the convoy escorts, where it was one of those things where I got a chance to go to all the places you see on the news, Ramadi, Al-Assad,
Right.
all those places that were bad places, and I think I enjoyed being out with the small team of guys and gals, and going out and doing those escorts, and being really good at my job doing that, and being basically a gun truck commander, and I'll say that I took great pride in a lot of the convoy commanders from the logistics side being like, hey, we're going to Ramadi for this mission. I want Lieutenant Wood as my convoy escort. Like, it was one of those things where it's like that made me feel great. And I ended up doing a lot of turn and burns, and the guys that were in my gun truck team, they knew it. They knew we were going to get down to the border of Kuwait and Iraq, and Navstar or K Crossing when they changed it up. And we weren't going to go all the way back to Arifjan, where we were based out of. We were sitting in the border. We were going to wait for the next convoy to come up. And we were headed out again. So I did a lot of missions. I think I did, out of the year I was over there, 27 missions. And those 27 missions could last anywhere from like 3 or 4 days to the longest I think we had was 14 or 15 days, because you have blackouts because helicopters can't fly, so medevac can't get out, so you're stuck at a base for another night. We had incidents where roads were blown up, things like that. You couldn't get there through the alternate supply routes or the main supply routes. So we were out there a lot. And out of those 27 missions, I think I encountered 6 IEDs and a ton of small arms fire and things like that. It was what, like I said, it was one of those balancing things where you love doing it, but the reality was, you were going to see some, especially out there, the IEDs and EFPs at the time, they were doing those explosively formed projectiles, those different things you were going to encounter everything.
How did you deal, again, more connectivity here between you and I mean, I probably logged between 6,000 and 7,000 miles on the roads of Baghdad in my first deployment. It's all I did. Every 4 to 5 days of a 7-day week, I was out on the roads running convoys from point A to point B. It was the nature of the job that I was assigned to. So I lived on the roads more than most transportation companies did. Now, again, I didn't have like 5, 6, 7-day missions. Mine were usually, into the morning, back in the afternoon, or an overnight and then come back kind of deal. But, there would be mornings where, you get 2 or 3 months into this thing and you're out on the road and you're just like, you keep getting all these reports, EFPs, IEDs, this route's black, this one's red, this one's black, don't go there. And there were mornings I would get up with just this sinking feeling like, today's the day. It's going to happen. I can't keep, as a gambler, okay, as a notorious degenerate gambler, I can't keep rolling the dice and not eventually throw a 7. Eventually it's going to happen and I'm going to hit a bad number. And sure, it did happen, but there were those mornings that were just, so, I was just, even when I was trying to get everybody ready and we were getting kitted up, and I tried not to let it ever show on my face. And, and at times when it got really bad, I had to walk around the corner of the building by myself and just sit there for a little bit to breathe and not let anybody see me sweating. But did you ever have those feelings? Did you ever just feel like, and how'd you deal with it?
Yeah, you definitely get those gut feelings, especially like you said, like after about 3 months and you get really used to the routes and you understand like what places are it's like driving around your neighborhood. The places that are really bad and the places where, there's nothing, the chances of something happening to here, slim to none. And it was normally those places where it got really bad where you're like, oh, tonight's the night, something's going to happen. You could just feel it. Like there would be some downtime where you wouldn't hear much from the intel reports and things like that. And you're like, man, they're just building for something, I feel like. And you'd go out that night, and of course, something would happen. I think the one night that it actually all came true for me was we were going from, I think it was Scania to Baghdad. We were going to go take Route Irish up to Bayat. And we were about to make the turn within like a mile onto Irish. And I was like, man, something doesn't feel right. And then within seconds, an IED blew up, right next to our gun truck. And fortunately, my gunner was down in the turret. And, he was probably getting me a Red Bull or something like that out of the cooler to pass up to me in the front. And shrapnel hits the truck. Shrapnel hits the convoy, the tractor trailer in front of us. The Connex that was on the back of the tractor trailer just had shrapnel all in it. And we were just very fortunate that they had buried it too deep into the ground. And so we just got like shrapnel and things like that instead of getting the full explosion of it. But that was the moment where I think all the three of us, my driver, my gunner, and me, sat in the gun truck for about 30 minutes just driving completely silent. Like it was one of those, man, that was very close to death there.
The pucker factor. Yeah. That was the only thing that was speaking at that point in time. Was your a-hole. Saying, "Hey, loosen up." But no, I mean, listen, I can totally relate. And for the record, those for civilians listening, you bring up an excellent point. I've never really kind of talked about this, but IEDs, that is a trial by error science that terrorists use, and I would tend to say more often they got lucky better than good. There were a select few of groups and cells that knew what they were doing all the time, but most of them, didn't ever get it right. And if they did get it right, they were more lucky than they actually were like, oh, this is how we planned it to go. So, and that's the randomness of combat, right? Like that's the part of it that is so hard to shake. Because, and I've said this religiously, I know people who have done everything right by the letter of the law, by the training, by the doctrine, and everything that they've learned. They've done everything right, and the bad things still happen to them. And I know people who have done everything wrong, completely foobarred it, and made every mistake you could think of and walked out scot-free. That's just the and that's the part that gives you that uneasy, queasy feeling that no matter what I do, I don't really have any control here.
Well, one of the craziest stories I remember from my first deployment was we were in Mosul. A female soldier was walking out of the gym, and a mortar round literally hit her, and didn't explode. But it was basically a mortar sniper round, and like that's when I was like, man. When it's your day, it's going to be your day. I mean, if something like that, with the chances of that are probably like 1 in a million of just getting hit with a mortar round and it not going off. It's things like that. I mean, and then I've had those pucker factors where you talk about, just, ineptness of the, the groups and the insurgents and people like that over in Iraq. I remember one time we had it was basically a dummy round, from forget what it was, RPG. It was a dummy RPG round, like hit the truck, and it was like, what was that? And it was like it was a training round that they used for training, and they were just trying to test out what the convoy would do in that situation. So I mean, it was wild.
That's insane. Yeah, I'm sure they were expecting a different result, and I would argue that it's probably with them shooting it, the chances of them actually using a mortar that works and hitting somebody, not even directly, but close enough to impact them, are pretty slim. For one to hit you, bounce off, and not explode is a whole different level of better go buy a lotto ticket. That's your lucky day and beyond, to say the least. So this second deployment, when it comes to an end, month and year, and kind of where are you mentally at the second deployment? Is there a part of you that's like, okay, I've seen enough, I've done enough, time for me to go home kind of deal?
Honestly, that was August 2005 to August 2006 timeframe. During that time, I was in a really bad place, like just personally. I had been married before my first deployment, like literally got engaged in college, got married in August of 2004, deployed for my first time. And so me and my new wife had nothing. Like we had lived together for a couple months before I was off to Iraq the first time. So I came back from that deployment. We struggled as a couple. We were still together. And then the second deployment, it all fell apart. So I'm out there doing these missions and not being able to reach back home a lot because you're constantly gone, or you're trying to find a sat phone or things like that. And then, it was just a rough time, and she had a rough time with everything. So we ended up getting split and divorced after that second deployment. And then I got back from the second deployment and became the executive officer for the company, for 89 Transportation Company, and spent about 3 months as the XO. And then the company commander was set to transition. They didn't have an available captain at that point. I had just got promoted to captain. And so they were like, hey, you've got experience with this unit now. Do you want to take over company command? And it's like, sure, I'll be company commander at 25 years old. And so I took company command and almost, again, immediately deployed that company to Iraq. And that time we were stationed at Camp Taji for 6 months.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good old Taji. Real quick, before you get into that, I wanted to ask you about, that emotional time you were going through personally while you're deployed. I mean, one of the, now both my deployments, I was single, didn't have any kids or anything like that. And the only job I had to worry about was keeping myself alive. Like, that was the easy part. Like, keeping myself alive and not buying dumb shit, which I was pretty good at. So, yeah, I'll never forget. I see dudes with 70-inch screen TVs. I'm like, dude, what are you doing with that? That doesn't fit in a tough box anywhere. How the hell are you getting that home? Well, I'll ship it. I'm like, you're an idiot. Okay, anyway. But, my 13-inch little TV that I played my PlayStation on was more than enough for me. But, the ways you break a soldier on a deployment, mess with their pay, mess with their family, right? Like, you will automatically make a soldier ineffective on every level if you mess with their pay or you mess with their family. And sometimes those are connected. And if the family messes with you, it 100% affects your ability to be your best. And I know this. I mean, like, my second deployment, I got a Dear John letter. I was dating a girl for a couple months before I left, and broke up me, like, essentially verbally before it and right before I left, day or two before I left. But then we talked a little more, and then the letter came. And so I know how much that affects you. And of course you try to focus and bury yourself in work, and you try to stay, on point as best you can. But you got a lot of time to think. And there's a lot of alone time and a lot of downtime on a deployment. Did you find yourself going stir crazy and trying to drive yourself crazy?
Yeah, I think that played a role in, I mentioned that I was constantly going on missions. I was constantly gone. Like, I wanted that, I didn't want to sit around on Arif John down in Kuwait, have time to think. I wanted to be constantly moving, because I think that helped me cope with what was going on back at home, is just always being in the mission. And there came a time where, my ex had just completely disappeared, basically off the face of the earth from my perspective. I couldn't get in touch with her, couldn't reach her, couldn't do a lot of different things. So it got to a point where, all right, I just knew at that point it was over. And so I was trying to deal with, separation and legal documents and doing all that stuff for, a divorce. Meanwhile, that night I got to go out and, drive some of the most dangerous roads in Iraq. Yeah. So that was definitely a crazy balance to try to strike. But I like you said, I tried to limit any downtime I had, but just let's just keep going. Let's go, another mission.
Do you get any emotional relief on the deployment, or it doesn't come until you get home?
What's that?
Do you get any emotional relief on that deployment, or it doesn't really happen until you get home?
It doesn't really happen until I get home.
Okay. Did you ever end up speaking with her when you got home?
What's that?
Did you ever end up speaking with her when you got home?
Briefly. Yeah, it's basically a long story there, but some, she had moved back home to Tennessee. There was a lot of different things going on with her, and so we spoke very briefly, and then over, and then kind of moved on after that.
Well, again, empathy, sympathy, all the above. I know where your heart and your head were, and it's never an easy place to be. I mean, again, the easiest. There are times I've said too, now married and post-married and everything else with kids, and There are times I've always said, or I wished I was back on deployment, because keeping myself alive in certain cases was the easiest hard job you've ever had.
Yeah.
I mean, there is literally only one thing that you need to concern yourself with. Bills get paid, fine, somebody's got them. The check's getting sent home, everything's okay. You assume kids are fine. Like, I didn't have kids on my deployment, but you make a lot of assumptions about everything else. That's fine. Everybody's in good health. There's nothing, until you get a phone call that tells you something otherwise, you can live in la-la land that nothing else is wrong with the world. All I got to do is stay alive. That seems fairly easy. And you play mind games with yourself like that, but it is the reality. Okay, so you take over company command now, and you're going back to Iraq a third time. And this is all literally within a span of like 4 years, 5 years?
Basically 3 deployments. 3 years. I was gone for 3 years and 5 years, basically. 5 years.
So you're heading to Taji, okay? Now you have command. Is the world different for you from a command perspective?
Yeah, a lot different. I think instead of being kind of in it and being like actively, on missions every night and doing those kind of things, now you're at that higher level kind of oversight over everything that's going on. And then the Army was kind of different at that point. I don't know how much different it is today, but we were deploying. The op tempo was so high. Companies were deploying specific platoons instead of the whole company in some cases. So when I got to Taji, there was a couple of platoons that had been deployed without a mother company, basically. So they had platoon leaders, but they didn't have a company to report up to. And so I had my own company, and we were going to be a palletized load system, company where you basically can drop the load and go. And then I had a 915 company, was a tractor trailer company. And then I had a cargo transfer company platoon that was also going to be tied to me, that worked the staging yard with all the material handling equipment, the forklifts, the wretches, all those kind of different things. So I quickly gained a hand receipt that was like $100 million. And here I am, 25 years old, a company commander with $100 million.
Just sign here. It'll all be fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So I had my company, which was, a maintenance platoon, a headquarters platoon, and then 3 line platoons. And then I had 2 other additional platoons on top of that. So I ended up with a little over 200 soldiers that were assigned to me as well as that. So that kept me extremely busy, just running around. And then, obviously you have your other, soldier issues that you have to deal with, where, you got, money issues, you got all the things that you got to help soldiers with, and working with the first sergeant to do, resolve all those kind of different things. You got soldiers doing dumb stuff when they go home for R&R, coming back and, getting in trouble. So, I mean, it was a lot different than being a platoon leader and just being able to go on missions. As a company commander, you're really the health and welfare, making sure everybody's taken care of, making sure they have all the right resources, and making sure everybody can do their jobs, and then, the disciplinary stuff that comes along with it. And then you get a little bit more, the bureaucracy, because you're now like, reporting to the battalion commanders and brigade commanders and things like that. So it was a little bit different doing those briefings and everything else. But yeah, so a little bit different.
Were you the commander who went out more on convoys, or the one who had to go out less just because you're buried in paperwork?
I tried to get out once a week.
Okay.
And that deployment was more like the deployments you had, where it was overnight type stuff. It was quick around the Baghdad, Taji area and back. Yep. It wasn't like a lot of the missions were not going to be overnight. So I was able to take one night a week and go from Taji to BIOP or things like that, and then come back. And then about 6 months into the deployment at Taji, there was a company that was getting transferred to Afghanistan from Iraq. And so they wanted us to go down and replace them. So 6 months into that deployment, we basically did another RIP with another company down at Camp Liberty on BIOP and replaced them. And then I ended up with my same company, but another 2 platoons from other companies. And one was a HET company, the big trucks that carry the Bradleys and Abrams and all that kind of stuff. And every night we get a call that one of them ran over, in a whole entry control point or something like that, because those things were so big and hard to maneuver. But yeah, that was about 6 months in, and then We ended up leaving, I think it was December of '09, yeah. So 08, '09 was that deployment. And then I came back home and relinquished command and got a break job as an aide to a 2-star general.
Interesting. By the way, tank graveyard on Taji, still cool. For those who don't know, during the first Gulf War, all of the Iraqi tanks that were destroyed by us were left at this one base in Taji, and they're all still there. Now there's, well, at least when I was there, in 05 and 06, they were spray painted with, bleep you, Iraq, go USA kind of stuff, that whole, we kicked your ass, let's rub it in your face now by desecrating your blown up tanks. So that's fun. And best chow hall I had in Iraq on Taji.
Oh yeah, I'd definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I mean that was the best part of convoys to Taji, and we would make sure we would actually plan to get out on the road right as sun up. So when we got there, we'd have time to sit there for breakfast for a couple of hours before we turned around and went back. So it was well coordinated to go get a good breakfast at Taji's chow hall. Yeah,
no, I remember when we did convoys to Taji, my second deployment. That was the spot because you'd stay at that warehouse, the truck stop they called it, and then you'd go get chow, and that chow hall was always we tried to skip past bases faster so we could get to Taji and stay the night there instead of staying the night.
Listen, I don't debate that decision at all. Sometimes you got to think with your stomach. I mean, I'm Italian. It's what I do. So a good meal is never far away. All right.
No.
So you get back now. Are you before you take the desk job, are you done with combat at this point? Are you done with deployments? Is there a part of you that's sitting there going, okay, this is ridiculous. I'm glad I signed up for the Army, but I didn't want to be gone 3 out of the last 5 years and have a marriage destroyed and everything else. Look what all this has done to me.
Yeah, no, I think I was pretty much, I needed that. I needed a break. And the aide job was great. I had a great boss, Major General Jim Hodge. He was the commander for Military Service Deployment and Distribution Command out of Scott Air Force Base under Transcom. And so, that was high level logistics. Seeing the military and life at his level was very eye-opening for me. I mean, I learned so much from him. He mentored me a lot, and it was great. And then he ended up changing command there and came to Fort Lee, where he took over Sustainment Center of Excellence, which handles quartermaster, transportation, and ordnance. So the whole logistics group there. So he was there for about the last 6 months of my military career, and right around that time, I knew that was going to be it for me. I had an opportunity to go on and get promoted to major and go to another unit, but the other unit was most likely going to be down working with the 101st Airborne with their logistics folks and deploying again. And I was like, what? I think it's time to try with the world on the opposite side, the civilian world, and see what life has for me out there. And so that's the decision I made. And then my ETS date in the military was 9/11/2011. Wow. So the 10-year. Yep.
Anybody try to talk you out of it?
A few people did. I think a few people were like, hey, look, we still need good officers. We need good people in the military. I had, when I had first changed command and transitioned over to the job as an aide, I got awarded the Transportation Corps Officer of the Year in 2009, I think it was, right afterwards, and then had the aide job, and so it was one of those things where they were kind of grooming you to grow in your career and go off and eventually maybe be a general officer, and for me to kind of say I'm calling it surprised a lot of people. But I think a lot of people understood with the op tempo and with everything that happened in my personal life. Once I got a chance to explain that, they understood and they wished the best for me. And I was very fortunate that the general officer I worked for knew people and was able to get me kind of a job interview right away. And I got a job immediately after leaving the service. A lot of people don't get that opportunity.
No, it can be difficult to say the least. I mean, jokingly, I assume the job was at UPS after being a transportation officer, right? Or FedEx or something.
No, it's funny. Actually, it was for a defense contractor that they did logistics, but I was actually doing business development. So I did a lot of the going around and basically marketing of their capabilities and everything, and then writing proposals and things like that we would submit to the government, and hopefully, win stuff and win work for the company so we could grow the company.
How long did you stay there for?
3 years.
Okay.
I actually met, got out of the military in September, met the woman who would eventually become my wife and mother of my daughter that very next month in October, and we started dating and spent about 3 years together there in the Fort Lee area, me working for that contractor company. Got engaged, and then we got pregnant with my daughter in 2014, and that's when I moved back down this way to the Virginia Beach area, where I grew up, called home, and took another job as a program manager for a company called CACI. So still working in the defense contracting space today, but just moved on over this direction.
Right. At what point in time do you start to realize that your deployments are overcoming you mentally?
Gosh, it was probably before I had my daughter. It was probably like that 2013, 14 timeframe when my ex, my daughter's mother, kind of started raising concerns with a lot of the ways I put things, said things, the way, like my reaction to things, a lot of different things. She saw a lot of red flags, basically, for lack of better words.
Care to give an example?
Short-tempered was definitely one.
Yeah.
And it didn't take much to set it off. Like, where's my shirt? Oh my God! Like, the world's coming, falling on me. So little things would set me off pretty quick, and then she always noticed the little things, like I can't sit with my back to a door. Alcohol became kind of an issue. I used alcohol as kind of self-medication so that I could go to sleep at night. Things like that, I think, were just real big red flags for her. And then my ability to just communicate and empathize was
gone.
No,
yep.
It was non-existent. Like, we had gone through some situations in our relationship, in our marriage, where looking back on it now with kind of brighter eyes, it's like, man, I was an asshole. Like that. How could I not empathize and show some level of emotion in that situation? And in that point, it was almost like, well, suck it up. We're suck it up and drive on kind of attitude. And it shouldn't have been the case. So yeah, a lot of things like that really led to a lot of problems in our relationship. And I was not the one at that point to reach out and find help. I thought I could internalize everything, deal with it myself, work through it, and just suck it up and drive on. And it wasn't until after we had my daughter was probably like 1 or 2 at the time, and things came to a head with my relationship, and we split, and the world basically fell on top of me at that point. And I think that's when I hit my rock bottom. And I just remember being in a Days Inn hotel and really considering taking my life at that point. And fortunately I didn't. And I showed up at my parents' house the next morning, basically emotionally just done, crying, reach out for help. And my mom was able to get me on the phone with some folks, the VA, some, local help. And we were able to get in with some doctors and therapists and start the process.
When you look back on, how that unfolded, what would you change the most, if anything at all?
I think for me, it was definitely the reaching out for help and finding someone to talk to and being more open and honest with what was going on emotionally with me and things. I hid everything from everybody.
Right.
One of those things.
Do you think that if you had asked for help earlier, your marriage you're still together, you're on a different path?
Possibly. You can't say anything's for certain,
right,
but I
sure.
think probably would have helped me navigate what I was going through a little bit better. I know that when I did reach out for help and I started talking to someone and we started setting kind of mini goals and setting up, ways for a path forward, it really helped. And I was able to, and just talking to that one person, that the therapist, and just being, them finally cracking through the facade and everything, and finally getting to a point where I was open about how I was feeling and talking about feelings and emotions and all the things that a lot of times we're told not to talk about, or, it was something that helped me. And I found myself becoming happier with myself and falling kind of more in love with myself and who I was and who I was becoming. Because after the military, my identity was wrapped around, I'm a soldier. I'm a U.S. Army, veteran, soldier, officer, those kind of things. That was my identity. And then when I got out, it was like, who and what am I? And that, I think, if I would have found some programs and things like that I found myself eventually after we split, maybe things would have been different. Yeah.
And I only ask that from the perspective of, understanding our mistakes or I don't want to say mistakes. That's such a bad connotation in this case when it comes to what we're going through, but understanding the decisions that we made and how they affect others, and the second and third order of effects of that. I think it's important as you go through this process to reflect back on times where you weren't at your best and understanding why and understanding what you were feeling at the moment. And that better helps shape your ability to be self-aware enough the next time down the road to understand those feelings and not repeat some of the same mistakes. I think that's the kind of teaching point for vets with PTSD, and understanding what you were feeling and when you were feeling it. As you're going through the process of going through therapy and starting to uncover things about yourself, was there something in particular that you saw that you didn't like, or that you felt that it was just like, wow, this isn't me, and anything, along those lines?
Yeah, I think the specific thing was, for me, just overall, it was just the unhappiness with myself and my own self image, and the way I placed just so much emphasis on the material things and the making sure that people view me in a certain way and those kind of things. And so I feel like I faked a lot of my life up to that point, because I wasn't truly true to who I was as a person and the values I wanted to uphold and all those kind of different things. So I feel like a lot of me was a facade. It was It was play to people to make sure that everybody's got to like me. Nobody can disagree with me. And so once I got through that, and I was like, hey, look, here's who I am. Take it or leave it. Once I got to that point, I feel like that was a big breakthrough for me. A lot of things changed for me when I got to the point where, hey, not everybody has to like you. Not everybody has to accept you and your viewpoints. But you should demand that level of respect from people, and you should respect others and their views. And I think that's the point where it really broke through for me, and it kind of changed my perspective on how I lived my life.
So you got this 3-year period from like 2014 to 2017 where you're working through all this and you're still doing the defense contracting thing and everything else. At what point in time does an endurance race cross your path where you're like, oh, this seems like a whole lot of fun?
Yeah. So like I said, my daughter was born in 2014. 2015, 2016 is when my ex and I split, November of 2016. And at that point, I was, a physical and mental just mess. Like I stated, I was 50 pounds heavier than I am now, and it wasn't a good 50 pounds. It was not at all. And so I remember, I remember having a moment where I looked at my daughter and she was like sitting on the floor playing or something. And, I couldn't even get down on the floor without getting out of breath. I just remember being like, what kind of example am I setting for her? And I used to pride myself. I played football in college. I was a PT stud when I was in the military, kind of thing. Always scored 300s on my PT test, those kind of things. And then had just completely let that go over the last couple of years. So I happened to be on Groupon one day looking for something to do with me and my daughter, and I came across a Spartan race deal. And this was in like May of 2017, and it was for June, the next month. And it was here in Virginia, and it was one of those 6 mile plus obstacle course races. And I was like, you know what, let's give this a shot. I remember obstacle courses from when I was in the military. This should be fun. This should be a good opportunity.
It's not the leadership development reaction course. It's a little bit different.
Yeah.
Please get from this end of the thing to this end of the thing without getting wet. It's like Double Dare, for crying out loud. And then you're doing an endurance race, which is not the same thing. There's Double Dare and American Ninja Warrior. There's a large gap between the two of what you're doing.
Yeah. So I remember I had gotten a local gym membership here in the local area, and I got on a treadmill for the first time in forever. And the first mile I did on the treadmill was like a 15-minute mile.
Oh, Jesus.
It was really rough. And so I went and did the Spartan race. And it was 6 miles. And I remember there was about 400 times when I would just wanted to quit. And one of the obstacles I remember specifically is like a bucket carry. It's like a 40, 50-pound bucket carry. It's full of rocks. And you're holding it and walking. You got to basically make it through like, probably less than a quarter mile of a little loop with the bucket. And I set that thing down about 50 times. And there got to a point where I just sat on it for a few minutes and just was like, what has come of me kind of thing. And, but when I finished the race, in Spartan races, you jump over like a fire, to finish and, move over, immediately collapse on the ground. And I just remember being like, man, that was probably one of the tougher things I've ever done in my life. And it was self-imposed because of my own physical fitness level, but I want to do it again. And so I started, training and signing up for more and more Spartan races in the area. I mean, they have them in, North Carolina, West Virginia. So I was traveling around doing these races. And by the end of that year, I had lost 35 pounds, and I was going from the point where I was finishing top, 1,000 in the open division to where I was going down to Florida and finishing top 20 in the elite division for Spartan. And that's when I was like, okay, this is something that I really enjoy doing. It gives me goals to continue working towards and things to get, motivation to go to the gym, those kind of different things. So 2018, I started to get really heavily involved, start qualifying for world championships and national championships and things like that in obstacle course racing. And then I remember social media started kind of going on an upswing at that point. And then a couple years later, COVID happens and everything comes to a screeching halt. And gyms closed, everything's closed. And it's like, well, what am I going to do now? And so just started running and running long distances.
You just went old Forrest Gump. I just felt like running.
Yeah. So I just started running a whole lot. And I remember, I think it was right around Memorial Day after COVID had first started and everything's closed. So Memorial Day weekend, I was like, I got to do something to just challenge myself, give myself an event. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to see if I can run, because I had been running a lot, doing a lot of running extra workouts and things like that. I was like, I want to run 1 mile and see how fast I can run 1 mile. So that Saturday, Memorial Day weekend, I went out and ran a mile, and I did it in 4 minutes and 58 seconds. Fastest mile I've ever. And I was like, man, that was really good. I really like my fitness level right now. And so the next day I was like, well, I'd like to see how far I can run now. And so I ended up running a 50K the next day. It was 30 miles, just around the neighborhood, just, all the ways around Newport News, basically. I did 30 miles, and I did that in about 4 hours and 15 minutes, 4 hours, 30 minutes, something like that. And a lot of the folks that followed me at that point had some level of recognition with ultra running. And I had a few friends that had done ultra races and things like that. And they said, hey, that's not a time to sneeze at for a 50K. Like, you should really consider doing kind of ultras. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't want to get too skinny, because I just pictured these guys running ultra races being 120 pounds soaking wet.
Yep.
But I just remember finally things started opening up, and in October of that year, I decided to sign up for a 13-hour race, and I did about 67 miles in the 13 hours, and I finished second place in that race, and I was weighing like 180 pounds, and I was like, maybe this is my thing, maybe this is what I can do moving forward, and then I looked for bigger races and started wanting to do 100-milers and things like that. Just been kind of doing that ever since.
Outside of the fact that you need more professional help now, I'll ask the question. I say that in jest. While you're doing all this and pushing yourself physically to the limit, are you cognizant of the mental benefits that you're doing for yourself? Like, and what are they? Are they tangible enough for you to understand them?
Yeah, no, I think for me, and this is where my theory I talked about earlier comes into play about being older and having more success with ultra endurance events like 100-mile races, 24-hour races, things like that, is I truly believe that having some level of struggle in your life and being able to, and having struggled most of my early 20s and 30s with deployments, with everything else, has hardened my mindset. And so when I'm doing a 24-hour race and I'm 20 hours in or 18 hours in and things are getting really hard, and you can look back at, and David Goggins talks about this a lot. He talks about the cookie jar, being able to go back and look at things that you've already overcome in your life and say, basically, if I can overcome that, I can overcome these next 6 hours or things like that. And so I think it's really created a mindset for me where I tend to be a little bit more optimistic about everything now, because I feel like if I can start get into it, I can get through it. I can get through anything at this point. So I think that's helped me on in everything in my life. Is just the ability to take a more positive perspective at things and saying, hey, look, it can only be hard, but for so long we can get through this and we can work through whatever problem, whatever issue is in front of us. I think it's just definitely helped me in that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the same idea. I always tell myself, look, I'm not getting shot at today. Nothing tried to blow me up today, so I guess we're doing better than most days I was for 2 years in Iraq. But I think that in finding all this stuff, there is a part of you that gets opened up that you didn't know was there, and I think the benefit to that more than anything is you spend more time with that part of yourself than the part of yourself that's hurting, than the part of yourself that is anxiety ridden, that is depressed, that has post-traumatic stress, that has, that is a part of us that when you get sucked in, it's like climbing out of a hole in the beach with sand, and all you can grab at is more sand. And every time you try to grab at it, you're actually making the hole a little bit deeper. And you can get stuck there pretty quickly. And you have to find some innovative ways to get out. But once you do, and you put yourself somewhere else, that hole, is much easier to stay out of. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I mean, I run a lot of these races without headphones, all the races I've done.
Oh, so you're completely crazy. Okay, got it. Noted.
But you're right. It's that it's almost therapeutic in a lot of ways, because you're forced to be in your own mind. And trust me, when you're 80 miles into a 100-mile race, the demons come. It's hey, why are you doing this? What, all those, just quit. Nobody would fault you if you quit right now. Just all those different things that you're faced with, you start to bubble up, and you're going to be in your head for 24 hours. And, there's no music, there's no podcast to listen to. It's just you and your mind, and can you overcome the quitter mind that will eventually show up? And then, what are the things that you're going to learn about yourself and during those 24 hours or 36 hours or 48 hours? And I mean, there's been times, specifically one of the races I did, back in March, I did 36 hours wearing a 20-pound tactical vest and ran 101 miles in 36 hours. And it was on a trail loop. It was basically a 3-mile. You just run a 3-mile trail loop over and over again for 36. And I learned so much more about my own mental strength and just like on top of the physical strength, obviously, to do it. But I mean, it was a learning thing for me on how I was able to push through all those different things that came up in my mind, and then the things I learned about my own strength, my own mental strength, were outstanding. And then the next race I did, the very next month, I did a 24-hour race, and I was struggling for a lot of that race. I ended up doing 105 miles in the 24 hours, but it was funny. I was battling for second with another gentleman, and something clicked in the last hour, and I was right at 101 miles when 23 hours came up, and I knew I was going to have to push to finish second, and I ran 4 miles pretty quickly in that hour. And the last mile I did, it was my fastest mile. The 105th mile was the fastest mile of my day. It was like a 7-minute and 45-second mile for the 105th mile. And I had pushed myself to the absolute limit on that mile, but there was something there. And I'm in chase of that. It's like, what did I find in that moment that drove me that hard? And can I find that against doing something else?
It's unreal. I don't want to drive 105 miles, and let alone run it, and nor do I want to be awake for 24 hours straight. And you're actually doing physical activity. So there's the difference between you and me, among other things that we don't need to write the list of right now. So we can get back to the matter at hand. I think when I hear you talk about all this, you can certainly see how much it brings you to life. But it kind of goes back to that thing. When you are entrenched and your mind is focused on a thing that you love, it brings so much more clarity to other things. And do you find yourself on these runs with no headphones, you psycho, and nothing to listen to, you maniac? Does your mind drift back to other things? Are you going through any PTSD moments? Are you thinking about combat? Are you thinking about your daughter or your relationship that failed or whatever it may be? Does that make it easier to run?
Yeah, no, I think you definitely do think of the things that from your past. I think those things bubble up definitely throughout that 24 hours or 36 hours. You have time to reflect on a lot of different things and really do that self work in that moment. It's painful, but you get the chance to do that self work and really look at yourself and say, man, I wish I could have done this maybe a little bit better. And you're not looking to change anything necessarily, but you're looking to, how can I improve? How can I make myself better for a next relationship? Or how can I make myself a better father in a lot of cases? And I definitely think about my daughter a lot during these races. And even when I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro last September.
Oh, dear.
And what's that?
I said, dear Lord. I guess that was like an average day. Just got to the top of K2. We're good.
Yeah. No. Okay. So it was, but she comes up into my mind. She's one of my primary motivators, just because I feel like I'm definitely setting an example for her. And then when I came back from Kilimanjaro in Africa and everything, I showed her all the pictures and everything. And the first question she had is, well, when can I climb a mountain? And so it was like, man, I don't know. So we have in Virginia, we have the Appalachian Trail, we have Appalachian Mountains, and there's a specific spot called Old Rag Mountain, which is basically a 10-mile, up and down, kind of deal. And there's a rock scramble. There's parts that are pretty technical. She's 7, and I was like, well, we could try it. And so a couple months ago, she made her first summit attempt and climbed Old Rag Mountain and loved it. Did 10 miles. We did the 10 miles in about 5 or 6 hours. And, that was a bonding experience between the two of us. And it all stems from things that I love to do. She sees, and she wants to get involved now too. And so I think those are some of the primary motivators for me, is just the ability to work through and have that kind of 24-hour therapy with myself and build that self-awareness and start really reflecting on things and growing myself. And then obviously my daughter.
Yeah, I mean, it is amazing. Let me ask you, what if endurance athlete Jason could go back and say something to post-deployment, final deployment, end of military career Jason, what would he say?
Oh, man. God, that's a good question. I think
what's
the biggest,
one piece of advice you give to yourself?
Yeah, I think the one biggest piece of advice is, it's, I guess, just be in the moment. Be in the moment. I think I find myself in the moment more now, whether it's with my daughter, during these races, when I climbed Kilimanjaro and I made the summit of Kilimanjaro, and just living in those moments. Post-deployment Jason never lived in moments. Post-deployment Jason was always thinking about what's next. What do I got to do here? What do I got to do there? I never really appreciated the moment I was in or the person I was with at that moment. Those kind of different things. I really didn't do that. But now I take the time now, like even when you're in pain at mile 80, appreciate that moment. Like that's a moment in your life that you can look back on and reflect on later on and say, man, I remember when this happened and I was really in pain, but I was able to work through that. There's not a lot of those moments that I had back post-deployment, Jason, that I can look back on and really reflect on and say, man, I really spent time and self-reflected on that moment or lived in that moment. It just didn't exist.
Does your daughter ever ask you about combat?
I think she's starting to. She's starting to kind of understand that Daddy did things, overseas and was in war and stuff like that. She doesn't ask me a whole lot about it. It's not something that's. I'll be honest. I have a few things here and there, but most of my stuff is honestly in a closet, and so I don't have a lot of my I Love Me book and a lot of the awards and stuff. I think there's going to be definitely a time and place for, when her and I have those kind of discussions and conversations. I think they're starting to bubble up. But right now she just wants Daddy to take her to the pool and take her to the beach and take her to Busch Gardens and kind of things like that. But,
I mean, practice the answer. It's the best piece of advice I can give you. If you're not prepared for it, you don't look like you ever want to talk about it again, so people don't ask. So, I mean, that's just small piece of advice from past mistakes I made when I was asked and didn't answer. Not by kids, just by people in general. And not regret per se, but, I think it goes back to that being ready to talk about it and acknowledging the fact that you have to answer that question sort of shoves you into ready. You don't think about it because you just sort of are able to put it in the file cabinet in your brain and leave it there, and no one's going to open that file cabinet up at you. But nobody asks you unless somebody asks you to go into that file cabinet. You never go there. It's so you just start thinking about what you want to say and how you want to say it. It's the best piece of advice I can give you. So you have also in your time as an endurance. I mean, we've had a lot of notable people on this show, but you have one of the larger social media followings of people we've had on this show. Did that develop organically, or? So it's crazy. A lot of it's developed organically through the Spartan racing and ultra running and those kind of different things. And then lately, I've had a crazy boom of social media. Literally within the last couple weeks, I started just creating reels. Just talking about just single life in your 40s and just kind of being more myself. I think a lot of the content I was creating previously was built around how do I help motivate and talk about ultra running and things like that. And then it got to a point where just the growth became stagnant. I was like, you know what, I'm just going to do the things I like to do that make me laugh, that make my friends laugh, and post it on social media. And it kind of just exploded. And over the last
month, I've gained about 40,000 followers.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's been a wild couple weeks, just from reels that, I've posted, just, having fun. And I think that, I think people are able to see more into my personality now. I think a lot of people just saw me as very intimidating, this guy that runs 100 miles, all these kind of different things. And now that I'm kind of just having fun with, making people laugh and making myself have laughs and have fun with the content I'm creating, I think it's showing through.
Would Captain Jason Wood been able to have had that kind of fun with himself?
No.
Why?
No, it was, I think it was all serious.
I was going to say, I get the sense that you took yourself too seriously, and like you didn't allow yourself to have fun, and I'm not answering the question for you, but I'm just kind of gleaning from the conversation. One of the things I was thinking of when I asked you that question about what would you, endurance athlete Jason, tell post-deployment Jason, I felt like you were going to say, give yourself a little bit of grace. Like I keep hearing that, forgive yourself a little bit more. Stop being so hard on yourself. Stop acting like things are life and death. Like that was kind of a sense of what I was picking up from our conversation.
No, that's probably another very good one. I probably should have told myself. I mean, that's exactly, I'm going to write that down, but no,
I want to see it in a reel coming up. I want to see.
Yeah.
I want you to play out the reel of endurance athlete Jason talking to Captain Jason. There you go.
No, but you're exactly right. I mean, I did not give myself an inch of credit for a lot of different things. I mean, it was one of those things where it was just literally, if I made a mistake, I was going to be the hardest person on myself for making that mistake. And I wouldn't let it go. And I was definitely more of a perfectionist. I was definitely very serious about things and what I wanted to do in my life and everything. I was not able to let go and just be like, hey, this is me. But yeah, I think that's grown over time.
You realize though that not being able to let go, that is, and I don't think we talk about it enough when it comes to PTSD because we talk so much about an event-based thing, right? But not being able to let go of things is both trauma related, but it's also training related, right? We're not taught to forget mistakes in the military. It's not part of what we do. We want to learn from them, but what do we do with everything we do? We write it down, and it's on a piece of paper, and it's signed at the bottom by somebody important, or at least somebody who thinks they're important. So we don't ever repeat the same mistakes again. Like that is ingrained in our training to not forget mistakes because we will repeat them if we don't write them down. And when you write it down, you are not only etching it on paper, but you're etching it into your memory as well, which is why we do that. And so that sort of training predisposes us to don't forgive, don't forget, because if you make the mistake again next time, it could cost you dearly kind of mentality. And that sometimes can be a dangerous place to be.
I completely agree. And you spend a lot of time dwelling on those things instead of just looking ahead and like saying, hey, look, that was the past. I learned from it. Let's grow from it and move forward. Instead, you're just constantly, remember when you did that? Remember when you did that?
Yeah.
And it's very unhealthy. But yeah, you're exactly right. I'm definitely writing that down and doing a reel now.
What is next for you from an endurance race standpoint? Like how much longer do you know how much longer you want to do this? Do you want to continue to work in this world? Do you just want to go back to being like regular Jason, Department of Defense contractor Jason?
Yeah, no, I don't think I do. To be honest, I think I enjoy this a little too much. So it's just becoming how far can you push yourself? I mean, so the 100-mile mark has been something that I've achieved multiple times now. I did 3 100-mile races in 3 months back a couple months ago. One of those races was with the 20-pound tactical vest on. A lot of these events I try to use as a platform to raise awareness and funds for other veteran type organizations. The one that I did with the 20-pound vest was to raise money for canines for warriors. They, basically save canines from kill shelters, train them up, and provide them to veterans in need that have service animal needs, whether they have PTSD or other things. So the next big thing that I want to do is actually, I was trying to plan it for September, but it makes more sense for November. So we're going to do it in November, but I'm going to do a 48-hour treadmill run So I'm going to spend 48 consecutive hours on a treadmill and
going absolutely nowhere.
Going absolutely nowhere. So,
wait, let's just clarify. 48 hours running on a treadmill, or just on a treadmill? Like, it's actually going to be moving, right?
Well, most of it was moving. Like so I honestly have a goal. I would love to be able to get the reach goal is 200 miles in the 48 hours. So that's going to require That's going to require some level of making sure I'm running, walking. A lot of the 100-mile runs, you can run a majority of the 100 miles. Like the first 50 miles for me are pretty good in a 100-mile race. I do that in about 8 hours, which is about a 9-minute, 45-second mile for 50 miles. And then after that, then once you get to mile 80, that's when you're really doing a power hike, run combination if you want to run under 24 hours or under 20 hours, those kind of things. But with 48 hours, you're definitely going to be doing a lot more, probably walking, running.
Gotcha.
So trying to strategy out for that right now.
Are you surprised that your body physically is held out? I mean, are you nagging with any injuries or dealing with anything?
No. So I when I came off of the last one I did, I knew my body was like, okay, we need a little bit of a break. I could tell, but nothing was injured. Nothing was hurt. It was just I just needed to give my body that break from that many miles for 5 consecutive months, 6 consecutive months when you include training and everything else. So I took about a month or two break, but I feel great, and I don't know. We'll see if something ever does finally fall apart on me, but for the most, it's all held together so far, and I turned 41 in a couple weeks, so we'll see.
Give it 3 years. I felt great at 41. Since then, I've had 3 surgeries. I'm headed for a 4th. Things broke down very quickly on this old man. So, seriously though, I wish you the best of luck with it. I mean, it's unreal.
I appreciate it.
I don't know how physically my body could stand the. And look, I did a couple of marathons, right? And I realized after the second one, I'm like, I don't need to run this far unless anybody's chasing me. So I'm not going to continue to do this. I run for pleasure now, right? Like when I want to clear my head, or I just feel like I want exercise, or it's a nice day, just go for a run, get a little sweat in. It's more mentally therapeutic right now. But for you to be able to do that at the level that you do is it's utterly amazing. There's there might be 200 Navy SEALs in the world, and there's probably 150 endurance athletes who can do what you do. So it's a very small population, to say the least. I still think you're freaking nuts, but to each their own. Everybody's got to have a vice, right? Mine's booze and cigars and brown liquor, and you like to run. Knock yourself out. Glad we can finally diverge on something, because we've been connected through a lot of other things. I mean, look, I still work out. I had to do it in pain. But, like you, the only reason I'm still working out at this rate is when I get old and I can't find my shirt, I say, screw it, I'll just go shirtless and everything's fine. So you can relate to that, I assume. There you go. Problem solved.
No, so it's always funny because I'm always like one of the bigger guys on the start line, because
really?
I'm about 185 pounds, 190 pounds. I stay there pretty easily, unless I string together a couple months of like just back to back 100-milers or something like that. I normally maintain. And so when I get to a start line, people look at me funny, like, oh, you sure? And then later on in the race, I'll get to like mile 100, and like you'll have some of the smaller guys still looking at me like, you're still around? Like, what's going on? But that's kind of how I got a lot of the social media following too, is a lot of specifically men reach out and say, hey, how do you maintain that level of muscle mass along with running these crazy distances and stuff? And for me, it's a lot of food and just staying in the weight room. I still, lift 4 or 5 days a week, and I'm able to get my runs in and everything on top of that. It's just, for me, it's always been about prioritization of time and what's important to me. And I think just the running is something that I love to do. But like you said, like I don't necessarily want to lose muscle mass and, really.
I keep telling people that I've been trying to kill the meathead in me for the better part of 5 years right now, and it won't die at all. I'd love for it to die. I'd love to just be able to go there and put up 135 pounds and call it a day, but that's just not in my DNA at this point in time. So maybe after the 4th surgery, who knows? And I've had 2 shoulder surgeries, so I've torn both labrums. So it's a long road back from surgery, and I say that as a friend, but we've gotten off the beaten path here. All right, make sure you guys follow Jason at jfloydwood, all one word, jfloydwood, on Instagram to see all the wonderful reels that you're making, and the great. It is great content. It's funny. It makes me laugh. I will say that much. It's your style is unique, and I understand why you've gained a following, but. I think in the big picture, man, it's there's obviously a ton to be proud of there, but don't forget to be proud of the old stuff, not just the new stuff, right? Sometimes pride is one of those emotions that also has a negative connotation, and we tend to only be proud of the things recently that we're doing, and we leave in the past the things that we should be proud of, and that goes back to kind of forgiving yourself a little bit. Product of your experience, right? Product of your environment. You're here today because of who you were before, and that person might not be perfect, but they certainly weren't wrong, if that's a better way to look at it, at least. And I love what you're doing for vets. I love that you're speaking out, and I love that you're so open about your experience. That's super important. We need more of us who are willing to share their story and their struggles. And again, with me, it took multiple veterans to mention their story to me through this show and other outlets, but specifically there were a couple of them who really hammered home to me, Mark, go get the help you need. Like, honestly, don't wait any longer. You've waited this long. Don't wait any longer. And I think that's a great message that you're sending to other people. So certainly appreciate all of that and everything that you're doing, brother.
Hey, I appreciate it. I really love having the opportunity to come on here and speak with you. Again, it was a great conversation. I really, what you're doing for the military community and veterans and mental health and everything there, and raising awareness and having some great guests on. You're doing a great thing, brother, and I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. All right. Jason Wood, thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground podcast, hosted by Mark Zinno. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at producer@hazardground.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.